Hey, why don't you sit near the kitchen, Logan? That way you can be close to your roots. Grease and dish soap. The words rang out too clearly, slicing through the polished clatter of glassware and silver. A few polite chuckles sparked around the long mahogany table, then flared into laughter, loudest of all from Ronald, who nearly choked on his wine. Cheryl didn't join in. She just stared down at her linen napkin, smoothing the corner with a kind of detached boredom. Logan stood still for a moment, letting the comment hang like smoke in the air, then nodded faintly and slid into the seat they'd so kindly saved, right next to the kitchen exit. Behind the swinging doors, staff moved like clockwork. Clanging pans bellowed orders, steam rushing into the dim hallway every time someone pushed through. The table was full. Cousins, aunts, uncles, some old friends of the family. All had dressed for Thanksgiving at the Lighthouse, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Everyone except Logan, that is. He wore a plain charcoal sweater and clean, if scuffed, shoes. He hadn't come to impress. Across from him sat Zane, practically glowing under the soft golden light. A silk tie knotted just right, cufflinks catching the chandelier's glint. He looked like he belonged here. He leaned back in his chair with the ease of someone who knew he had the floor, and the applause. So anyway, I told the guy, look, if you're not going to triple the valuation by Q2, don't even call me. Zane's voice was just the right volume, rich with self-assurance. A few nods followed, though it wasn't clear if anyone knew what he was talking about. He glanced sideways at Logan with a grin. I mean, not everyone's cut out for corporate. Some people are more hands-on. The jab landed. Some laughed again. Logan took a sip of water. His eyes wandered across the table, taking in the glassy eyes of second cousins he hadn't seen in years, the smug pride on Ronald's face, the slightly forced grin of an aunt trying too hard to appear amused. Then his gaze met that of a passing waiter. Young, maybe early 20s, with a pressed shirt and a tray of wine flutes. Their eyes locked for a moment, and the young man hesitated. Pity? Recognition? Logan couldn't tell yet. Another plate of duck confit arrived, followed by pumpkin risotto and truffle-something appetizers. No one asked Logan what he wanted. The menu had been pre-ordered, Zane's preferences printed on custom cards. One read, "A taste of excellence, curated by Zane Anderson." Logan kept his hands folded in his lap. His stomach growled once, ignored. He didn't come to eat. And that's when they gave me the option to buy the entire floor, Zane said, raising his glass. Honestly, I thought, what would Dad do? So I signed the deal. To Zane. Ronald beamed, lifting his own glass with gusto. The smart one. Everyone toasted. Everyone but Logan. A few seconds passed, then the waiter returned. This time he stepped closer, too close for coincidence, and reached for the empty spot in front of Logan. From his tray, he poured a measure of a rich amber liquid into a crystal tumbler. Then he paused. "Welcome back, sir," the waiter said quietly, his voice steady, respectful. "We've missed you." The table froze. Ronald's smile slipped. Cheryl's hand froze mid-cut of her steak. Zane lowered his glass an inch, brows pinching. "You know the waiter?" Zane asked, voice clipped. Logan didn't look up. He let the silence breathe, then nodded once. He didn't offer an explanation. How does a dishwasher afford that watch? The comment was tossed lightly, almost lazily, but it struck the air like a knife thrown just to see if it would stick. Logan didn't flinch. He simply turned the glass in his hand slowly, letting the whiskey swirl in amber spirals. Zane, seated 3 places away, had leaned forward just enough to let the insult feel casual, like small talk, like banter. But his eyes were sharp, calculating. Ronald chuckled under his breath, the kind of sound a man made when he thought he was in on something clever. Cheryl, ever silent, folded her hands in her lap. She gave a quick glance toward Logan, but as soon as his eyes turned toward her, she looked away again. There were too many glances like that tonight. The room continued its soft hum. Cutlery tapping, chairs shifting, another toast clinking from the far end of the table where someone was bragging about a summer trip to Napa. Logan remained quiet. not sulking. Just there. A silhouette among spotlights. The waiter's earlier words, "Welcome back, sir," still hung unsaid among them, a thread no one wanted to pull too hard. But it pulled nonetheless. "So," Zane said, louder this time, tilting his glass toward Logan. "What exactly do you do these days? I mean, besides wandering back into fancy places dressed like a philosophy professor on sabbatical?" Logan smiled faintly. "Restaurant management," he replied, voice steady. Ronald barked a laugh, almost spraying wine. "That's a fancy way of saying busboy, huh?" Some laughter followed, tentative but present. People laugh more out of habit than humor. Cheryl didn't move. Zane smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. He leaned closer, tapping his glass to the edge of his plate. "Well, I guess that explains the watch. Management tips, huh?" Logan didn't respond. The waiter returned just then, placing a fresh glass near Logan's right side, his right hand. A small, almost imperceptible bow followed, and he disappeared before Zane could say anything. But Logan saw it. So did Zane. He shifted slightly in his seat, now fully facing Logan, no longer pretending this was casual. "You've got fans here, huh?" Zane said, voice tight. "I've been around," Logan answered, still nonchalant. "Familiar faces." Across the table, Ronald looked between the two, the crease in his brow deepening. For a moment, just a flicker, there was something like unease in his eyes. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew it wasn't going according to plan. Cheryl reached for her wine and sipped, the only movement she made in minutes. Conversation elsewhere at the table continued, but around Logan, a bubble of awareness grew. The words may have stayed light, but every sentence was a probe, a test, a shift in hierarchy. Zane, always used to control the room, was trying to figure out if the foundation beneath him had started to crack. That's when the restaurant manager appeared. He was a tall man, mid-50s, in a tailored navy suit, the kind of staff who never addressed guests directly unless necessary. Yet he leaned in beside Logan, careful not to interrupt others, and said, just above a whisper, "Sir, your private room is ready, whenever you're comfortable." The effect was immediate. Ronald blinked. Cheryl's fingers paused mid-gesture. Zane's smirk faltered, as if a string holding it up had been clipped. Logan stood up. He took his time, adjusting his sweater, leaving the napkin neatly folded on the seat. He gave the table one last look. Not hostile, not triumphant. Just composed. "Enjoy dinner," he said with a calm, polite smile. "I'll be around." "A private room? For him?" The voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Someone down the hallway, maybe one of the cousins, or perhaps just a surprised guest at another table, spoke the words with enough disbelief to leave a thin echo behind. Logan didn't turn back. He followed the manager up the marble stairs of the lighthouse, each step padded in quiet dignity. The air shifted upstairs. Cooler, still. The chatter from the main floor below became a distant murmur behind thick glass and heavy velvet. The private room sat at the end of the hall, half-glass walls revealing a sweeping view of the dining hall below. From here, Logan can see the long mahogany table, the backs of his family's heads, the way Zane leans in now, probably spinning another story about venture capital and pulling yourself up. It looked small from up here, all of it. The door clicked shut behind him. David, the manager, moved to the leather chair by the window. "Same table you use to polish every Sunday," he said, his voice edged with a half-laugh. Logan chuckled softly. "Still got the stain on the corner leg?" "Gone now. Renovated it last year, but I remember." David sat across from him, folding his hands. His tailored suit stretched slightly at the shoulders. He had put on some weight since the early days. "First time I saw you," he continued, "you were mopping the floor like it was your name on the lease. I told the owner back then, that kid's either going to burn out or buy the whole block." Logan didn't answer. He looked out the window. Zane was raising his glass again, Ronald already drunk enough to laugh at anything. David cleared his throat. Everything's ready. Your name is on all the systems. No one below knows except the senior staff, like you asked. Good. Logan reached into his coat, pulled out his phone. The screen lit up. Message from Bryce. Ready. Zane's debt trail is traceable. I have proof. Logan's jaw tightened. David leaned forward, softening his voice. You sure you want to do this tonight? You could just watch. Let them flail. It's not about revenge, Logan replied. It's about memory, making sure they don't forget what they tried to bury. He tapped the screen. An email opened, one he'd read 100 times but never tired of. Purchase contract. The Lighthouse Restaurant primary owner, Logan Hayes. Effective date, August 14th, 2023. His name sat there in bold, legally stamped. Zane had booked the Thanksgiving dinner here under the assumption of family tradition. What he hadn't realized was that the tradition now bore a different signature at the bottom line. Logan stared at the document. He let it sink in again. The years it took to go from kitchen floors to office floors. The nights spent sleeping on benches after double shifts. The deals made in whispered phone calls outside noisy back exits. The months of silence after being cut off by his own father. It had all led here. He set the phone down. David refilled his glass without asking. The lights from the main hall glowed like theater bulbs now. The stage was set, and the players were moving, oblivious to the hand behind the curtain. Logan tapped his fingers on the table once, a slow rhythm. Time to let them know who paid for their wine. That's odd. Logan's champagne came from the Platinum Reserve shelf. The words dropped like a pebble into a still pond. They came from a server, just loud enough to reach the ears of a nearby cousin who immediately turned to look toward Logan's seat. Zane's fork paused midair, an olive half-speared on the tip. Across the table, Logan sat calmly, napkin on his lap, a small smile playing on his lips. He wasn't showy. No sudden entrances, no loud announcements. He had simply reappeared as the main course was being served, sliding quietly into the chair that had been vacated for him. The same one next to Ronald, opposite Cheryl. No fanfare. But everything had shifted. The waiter who brought his plate didn't ask. He bowed slightly and said, Chef recommends the Wagyu, sir, before setting down a dish that wasn't on the menu. The meat, seared to perfection, gleamed under the chandelier light. The scent reached Zane's nose, and with it, something else. Confusion. Excuse me, Zane said, lowering his voice as he leaned toward Ronald. Why is he getting something different? Ronald shrugged, trying not to look as thrown off as he clearly was. Zane cleared his throat, louder this time. Waiter, why did he get that? The waiter, composed and well-trained, replied, Mr. Hayes requested from the VIP menu, sir. Standard protocol. Zane's eyebrows rose. VIP? Since when does he get VIP? Logan didn't answer. He cut into his steak, slowly, savoring each bite, as if the tension building around him was just background noise. His eyes, however, flicked up. Once, to meet Zane's. Calm, measured, unbothered. The energy at the table began to shift. Cousins whispered. Cheryl glanced at her son, then at her husband, but said nothing. Only her fingers moved, tapping nervously against her wineglass. Then came the next blow. A figure approached from the main hall, moving with a confident stride. Bryce, wearing a charcoal suit, clean-shaven, phone in hand. He walked past servers and guests with a nod here, a smile there, until he stopped right beside Logan. Logan? Bryce extended his hand, grinning wide. Appreciate the loan back then, man. Really helped me out. Zane snapped his head around. Loan? Bryce blinked as if the word surprised him. Oh, yeah. The $50K, you remember, covered a few of my startup costs last year. There was silence. Forks paused midair. All eyes turned toward Zane, who had gone stiff in his chair. Loan? Zane repeated, louder now, tone rising. Bryce raised his eyebrows, then turned slightly toward Cheryl. I assumed Zane paid you back, of course. Logan still hadn't said a word. He sipped from his champagne. Platinum Reserve, indeed, and kept his gaze level, unreadable. Zane's mouth opened, then closed again. His skin paled just a shade. I didn't. Cheryl's voice, usually soft, cut through the confusion with a quiet sharpness. Is that true? Everyone turned. Her eyes locked onto Zane's. Not angry, not hysterical, just stunned. Zane fumbled for words, but nothing came out. The clink of Logan's glass setting down was the only sound in the room. Wait! Logan, what is going on? Cheryl's voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the clinking of cutlery and murmuring conversations like a snapped violin string. Her eyes, once cast downward all evening, now locked onto her eldest son. There was no longer quiet dismissal in them. Instead, confusion, a dawning sense of unease, and something maternal that had long lain dormant. Zane stiffened beside her, his jaw twitching. The rising heat in his face betrayed a fear he hadn't planned for. This was supposed to be his night. Logan remained where he was, seated calmly with his fingers folded on the table, an untouched dessert in front of him. The waiter had placed it with a soft smile, bowing slightly as he said, "Pre-ordered by Mr. Logan West." The words hung in the air. Pre-ordered? Cheryl frowned. She hadn't seen him make a call, hadn't heard him whisper anything to the staff. Everything was just happening for him. Zane attempted to reclaim the moment. He let out a sharp laugh. So what? You ordered a dessert? That's your big twist? No one laughed with him. The master of ceremonies, standing near the stage, tapped his microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have just 5 minutes of your attention, before dessert, we would like to honor today's event sponsor. All eyes turned toward the podium. Zane sat straighter, adjusting his tie. Finally, he muttered, about time. But before he could rise, the MC continued. And that person is Mr. Logan West. Zane froze. So did Cheryl. So did Ronald. Only Logan stood, smoothly, quietly, with the confidence of a man who had orchestrated every detail from behind a curtain. He waved off the MC gently. No need for applause, he said, voice low but clear. I just wanted my family to enjoy one last dinner. Together. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall over a room, it chokes it. One of the guests dropped a fork. No one noticed. Zane's hand trembled, a fine, almost imperceptible quiver that grew with every passing second. He reached for his wine glass to steady himself, but it slipped, tipped, and crashed to the floor. Crystal shards sparkled like fallen stars across the marble. Ronald muttered a curse, but no one dared move. Logan didn't flinch. He turned, slowly, until his eyes met his father's. The same man who had once looked past him at every turn, who laughed a little too loud when Zane made a joke at his expense, who always seemed to forget Logan was in the room at all. I wonder, Dad, Logan said, voice dipped in something bittersweet. If you'd have laughed so loud, had you known I bought your seat? $50,000, Zane? That's a lot to forget. The words, though spoken in a hushed tone, echoed in Logan's mind as he stepped into the quiet of the private room. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, shutting out the distant murmurs of the banquet hall now beginning to crack under the weight of truth. Here, in this glass-walled chamber overlooking the glittering Boston skyline, he found calm. Waiting at the long oak table was Sophie Meyer, tailored in a sleek navy suit, her dark curls tied in a low bun and a manila folder open neatly before her. Logan gave her a nod. Did everything come through? Sophie didn't waste time. She slid the folder toward him, flipping through pages with crisp, practiced fingers. Transfer records from 2 years ago, when you wired Zane the $50,000. Email chains confirming the deal. Screenshots of the text where he said, and I quote, "You're a lifesaver. I'll pay you back as soon as I land that position at Alandra Corp." Logan arched a brow but said nothing yet. His fingers hovered over the final page. She slid forward. She continued. And here, she tapped a worn, folded sheet of paper. His handwritten agreement. Dated, signed. Photographed, by the way. I have metadata proof that the image is untouched. Logan gently picked up the contract. It was faintly creased, the edges slightly frayed. At the bottom, in bold, messy scrawl, Zane West. A short line written just above the signature read, "To Logan, I'll pay back as soon as I land that job." Logan stared at it for a long moment. That handwriting. He'd seen it 1,000 times. On birthday cards, on notes passed at school, on petty insults stuck to his locker. There was something poetic about seeing it now. Admitting debt. Admitting need. Sophie closed the folder with a satisfying thud. The question is, are you ready to make this public? Once this hits the table, there's no going back. He met her eyes, calm and unflinching. I want them to see everything. Not because I need revenge, because I need them to stop pretending they know who I am. She nodded once, pulled out a pristine envelope, and sealed the documents within. This is the version for the table. Minutes later, back in the dining room, the mood had soured. Zane sat rigid in his chair, jaw clenched, Cheryl visibly shaken, and Ronald, stone-faced but sweating. A waiter discreetly handed the envelope to Ronald with a quiet, "From Mr. West." Ronald's brow furrowed as he tore the flap. He unfolded the contents with slow hands, his eyes scanning quickly, then stopping, abruptly, at the bottom. His mouth opened, then closed. He read the line again, and again. "To Logan, I'll pay back as soon as I land that job." The handwriting was unmistakable. The room stilled as he looked up, his gaze jumping between Zane and Logan. Zane shifted in his seat. That doesn't mean anything. But it was too late. The proof wasn't just in the words. It was in the ink, in the familiarity of that signature, in the cold silence that followed. "Son, is this true?" Ronald's voice broke for the first time that night. The clink of cutlery ceased. The hum of ambient music faded into something distant and irrelevant. All attention at the long, elegantly set table turned to Zane, whose face, once cocky and confident, now wore a sheen of discomfort. Zane started, flashing a brief look of desperation at Cheryl, then at Logan, who remained seated, back straight, a silent pillar behind the turmoil. Ronald's hands, resting beside the damning document, trembled slightly. "You signed this. You asked your brother for money. $50,000. His voice cracked at the end, not with rage, but something closer to disbelief. Zane gave a dry chuckle, like brushing away a cobweb. "It's not like that, Dad. Logan misunderstood the context." "Misunderstood?" Ronald's voice rose. "You wrote it." "It was informal," Zane said quickly. "A joke, really. Brothers joke like that." Cheryl placed a cautious hand on Ronald's wrist. Her face was pale, eyes darting toward Zane, then back to the paper. Maybe he meant to pay it back. Maybe he just forgot. Zane seized that lifeline. "Exactly. I had plans to return it, but things got busy and... Come on, it's Logan. He never said anything." Logan's face didn't move. He hadn't spoken a word since the envelope was opened, but his silence now was deafening. Cheryl's hand slipped from Ronald's wrist and folded into her lap. Her voice was quiet. "You said Logan never helps the family. You told us he never lifts a finger, that he abandoned us." Zane swallowed hard. "He's always been distant. You know that. I didn't want to worry anyone." A soft chime broke the tension. Logan's phone, placed on the table, buzzed once. He tapped the screen with 2 fingers, no more than a whisper of movement. From the speakers, a recording began. Zane's voice, clear and arrogant, played out across the table. "Relax, man. He's dumb enough to believe I'll pay him back. He's always desperate for approval. That's what makes him useful." The silence afterward wasn't immediate. It crept in, slow like a winter draft. Zane lunged across the table, reaching for the phone, but Logan was faster. With casual ease, he lifted it from the table and held it above his shoulder. Zane froze, half standing, eyes wide, realizing how desperate he looked. Cheryl's hand covered her mouth. Her breath trembled against her palm. Ronald stared down, his lips pressed into a thin line. And Cheryl, her voice barely audible, whispered, "You used your brother and mocked him?" Zane sank back into his chair, shoulders hunched, all the charm and polish stripped away. Logan, finally meeting his mother's eyes, didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth was speaking for him now. "I'm not angry, Zane. I'm done." The words landed softly, but their weight sent a chill through the room. Zane stood frozen near the center of the private meeting room, the dark mahogany table between him and Logan like a chasm too wide to cross. Cheryl and Ronald, seated to the side, watched with wide, blinking eyes, uncertain whether to speak or simply witness the unraveling. Sophie Meyer, crisp in a navy suit, placed a thick folder on the table with precision. Her expression betrayed nothing. Calm, inevitable. "This," she said, flipping the folder open, "is a termination agreement. Effective immediately, it ends all existing financial relationships between Logan West and the West family, including but not limited to personal loans, business investments, and monthly maintenance subsidies." Zane's head jerked back. "You can't be serious." Logan didn't look at him at first. He just leaned back, fingers lightly steepled, eyes scanning the pages as if reviewing an old receipt. "I am," Logan said, "and it's long overdue." Zane took a step forward. "You're pulling the contract?" "Logan, come on. My business depends on your funding. You said you believed in it." Logan turned his gaze to him. "I believed in family. You mistook that for weakness." Cheryl opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hands gripped her clutch tightly on her lap. Sophie slid the top document toward Logan. "Sign here, initial there." Zane's voice rose in desperation. "You're cutting off everything? Even Mom and Dad?" "They never asked me for help," Logan replied, his tone colder than before. "They laughed while you humiliated me. That was their choice. This is mine." Zane scoffed, trying to muster bravado. "You're doing this out of spite?" Logan lifted the pen, poised it over the paper, then paused. His eyes locked with Zane's. "You said I was nothing," he said slowly, clearly, so even the walls could remember it. "You shouldn't depend on nothing." With that, he signed the document in a single, fluid stroke. The sound of the pen dragging across the paper felt final, heavier than any shouted accusation. Sophie took the folder, flipped to the next section, and pressed a company stamp onto the page with a sharp, echoing thunk. "It's done," she said. Zane's mouth opened, then closed. His face reddened, veins straining against the skin of his neck. "This'll ruin me. You can't just—" Sophie interrupted, looking directly at him. "By the way," she said coolly, "your accounts are frozen pending further review. Expect contact from the auditors." Zane staggered back like he'd been struck. "You froze my what?" Sophie nodded. "Company accounts, expense reimbursements, offshore links traced from Logan's prior investments. There were discrepancies." Cheryl stood up now, her hands trembling. "Zane, is this true?" Logan didn't answer. He didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. It was reality finally catching up. As the door to the meeting room creaked slightly in the air-conditioned hush, the silence stretched on, no longer heavy with judgment, but with the echo of freedom. "I'll sue you, Logan. You'll regret this." The words rang out like a desperate echo across the marble floors of the restaurant lobby. Heads turned. Guests still lingering in their suits and gowns paused mid-conversation, wine glasses frozen halfway to lips. Zane stood near the revolving doors, his face red, hands trembling, voice straining with rage. His tie was crooked, jacket askew, like he'd torn it on his way out. The glint of his polished image had dulled, replaced by raw panic. Logan stood a few feet away, calm, composed. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt and met his brother's wild eyes with an almost pitying gaze. "You'll regret this," Zane repeated, louder now. "You think this ends with your fancy documents and smug silence?" Several guests backed away from the commotion. A waiter hurried past, pretending not to see. The staff at the front desk exchanged glances. Logan didn't respond immediately. He simply took a step back, measured, unprovocative. That only seemed to inflame Zane more. "You set this up. You humiliated me on purpose. You think you can just erase me from the family?" He shoved a chair that had been left beside the waiting area. It scraped loudly across the tile before toppling with a thud. David, the restaurant manager, appeared at Logan's side within seconds, his voice low but firm. "Mr. Zane, you need to calm down. Security is watching. They've been monitoring this since the private room was closed." Zane turned, pointing a shaky finger at Logan. "He's manipulating all of you." Before he could continue, Sophie stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I suggest you stop right there." She tapped the screen and the display lit up with a still image. Zane mid-shout, the chair caught in motion, his face twisted in fury. "This is live security feed," she said. "The cameras in the lobby are rolling, and this footage is already backed up. Every word, every move. You're not just embarrassing yourself. You're building a case. Against yourself." Zane's breath hitched. For the first time all night, his mouth opened, but no words came out. Two uniformed security guards approached quietly from either side, not touching him, but standing close enough to end the chaos without a scene. Zane looked around wildly, at the other diners now whispering, at the cameras, at Ronald and Cheryl standing stiffly near the exit. Ronald didn't move to help. He stood still, watching the unraveling of the son he'd once believed could do no wrong. One of the guards nodded at Zane. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to step outside. You're disturbing the premises." Zane sputtered. "I didn't touch anyone," David said calmly. "But you threatened people." "That's enough." As the guards escorted Zane toward the exit, his steps heavy with shame, Cheryl didn't speak. Her hand gripped her purse like it was the only thing anchoring her. Ronald lingered. He looked back at Logan, brow furrowed with something deeper than anger. Something like realization. "I raised you both," he said, his voice low. "How did I not see this coming?" Logan met his gaze, steady and quiet. "You didn't look. Before you go, there's one more thing." The night had deepened, blanketing Boston in a quiet chill. Outside the restaurant's glowing front entrance, the air was brittle, filled with a silence more cutting than any words spoken inside. The party was over. The masks had fallen. What remained now were people, flawed, fractured, and shivering in more than just the cold. Cheryl stood a few paces from Ronald, her coat loosely wrapped around her shoulders but unfastened, as if she hadn't quite realized the night was truly ending. Ronald kept his hands in his pockets, his posture straight but tired. His eyes no longer scanned the horizon for answers. They stayed fixed on the man standing before them. Logan. He held a slim white envelope between his fingers, the seal unbroken, the edges crisp. He stepped forward, not with bitterness or triumph, but with a quiet solemnity, like a man attending his own final act in a play long overdue. "This isn't revenge," he said softly, offering the envelope to Cheryl. "It's clarity." She took it slowly, her eyes never leaving his. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against his, and for a fleeting moment she looked as though she might speak. But no words came. Ronald took the envelope from her and opened it. Inside, 3 sheets of neatly typed paper. No accusations, no legal jargon, just rows and rows of dates, dollar amounts and notations. Mortgage payments, tuition for Zane's graduate program, emergency hospital bills, travel expenses, gifts, holiday dinners, even a Christmas bonus he had deposited anonymously into the family account. Ronald's brows furrowed as he flipped through the pages. At the bottom of the last one, a paragraph stood alone. You never thanked me. I'm not angry, but I'm not available anymore. He read it aloud, voice catching slightly on the final word. Cheryl clutched her coat tighter, a soft gasp escaping her. Her face crumpled, the emotions too long buried now crashing upward. Her shoulders shook as the first sob broke through. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't see. Logan looked away, the corners of his mouth twitching with something not quite a smile. Not quite sorrow either. I didn't need applause, he said quietly. I just wanted to be seen. He turned then, the wind ruffling the hem of his coat. A few snowflakes drifted lazily in the air, catching the golden glow of the restaurant lights as they descended. But before he could take a step, Cheryl's voice stopped him. Soft, raw, trembling. We saw too late, son. He paused for a breath, eyes closing against the ache of what could have been years ago. And then, without turning back, he walked into the night. The truth doesn't need permission to show up. The words came not from Logan, but from Sophie Meyer. Measured, neutral, but carrying the weight of inevitability. The conference room inside the law offices of Meyer LLP was cold in its sterility. Long glass table, gray leather chairs, and a skyline view of downtown Boston filtered through low winter clouds. No warmth, no comfort, just truth in its barest, sharpest form. Zane sat across the table, stiff in a suit he clearly hadn't taken the time to press properly. His eyes darted between the folders Sophie had laid out and Logan, who sat quietly beside her, unshaken. A thin line of sweat formed along Zane's hairline. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You think you can just drag me into a law firm and humiliate me again? You're not here because of Logan, Sophie replied, sliding a file forward. You're here because you filed a lawsuit. What happens next is just the consequence of that choice. To her right sat Bryce, leaned slightly forward, hands folded, face composed. The financial representative from Logan's firm occupied the other side of the table. His briefcase unopened, his silence a promise that numbers would soon speak louder than words. Sophie opened the file. Here are the original transfer records. $48,000 wired to your personal account over 3 disbursements, June, August, and October, each one labeled as a loan. No business documentation filed, no incorporation, no use of funds for the stated startup. She passed the pages to Zane. He didn't take them. Bryce cleared his throat. He told me it was going toward a food truck investment. Then suddenly he was posting pictures from Italy and Vegas. Zane scoffed. That doesn't prove anything. I'm allowed to take a break. You told Logan you were hiring staff, Bryce replied. You said you needed bridge money for kitchen equipment. I remember because I vouched for you. Sophie slid another document forward. And here's the contract you signed, agreeing to repay the loan within 12 months. Signed and dated. Witnessed. Zane picked it up now, hands trembling slightly. This could have been doctored. It wasn't, Logan said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since the meeting began. Zane flinched. You've been planning this all along. No, Logan replied. I documented it all because you asked me to believe in you. I did. You failed. That's not sabotage. That's consequence. The silence that followed was only broken by the soft click of Sophie unlocking her tablet. One more piece. She tapped play. The room filled with the sound of Zane's voice, recorded in clear, scathing clarity. Logan's just a doormat with money. He'll always pay. Just act sad enough. Zane's face went pale. You... He shot up, the chair scraping hard against the tile as he slammed a palm onto the glass table. You set me up. This was all a trap. Sophie didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her voice. No, she said calmly, meeting his furious eyes. You built this trap yourself. Zane stood frozen. anger flooding into the hollow space where dignity once resided. But no one moved to defend him. No one disagreed. The truth didn't need permission to arrive. It already had. You wore your lies like a suit. It fits no more. The second session resumed in the same conference room, but the atmosphere had shifted. The walls seemed to lean inward, the table colder, more unforgiving. The first blow had landed. Now came the collapse. Zane sat slouched in his chair, no longer defiant, just cornered. The anger in his face had faded into something less controllable. Panic. Sweat beaded his temples as the door opened once more. Two figures entered. Cheryl and Ronald. Neither spoke right away. Cheryl's eyes were swollen, as if tears had been hovering since last night. Ronald walked in, slow, stiff. He didn't look at Zane. Not yet. Logan remained seated, his hands clasped calmly on the table. His silence, as always, filled the room louder than any accusation. Sophie stood. "This portion is an internal review, per your request," she said, looking toward Zane. "You wanted family present. You should be careful what you ask for." Zane sat up straighter, as if the presence of his parents gave him strength. It didn't last long. David, the restaurant's manager, entered next, papers in hand. He didn't sit. He didn't offer pleasantries. "2 years ago," he began, "I received a call from a bank rep saying Logan had personally vouched for a small business loan. But when I followed up with Logan, he looked confused. That's when I found out Zane had used Logan's name, signed digitally, and transferred the funds to start a bar that never opened." Cheryl's hand shot to her mouth. Zane's face turned crimson. "That's a lie. You can't prove We can," David cut in. "The IP address for the application matched your home Wi-Fi. The signature came from your device. The timeline checks out." Zane started to speak, but Cheryl let out a small cry. Sharp, fragile, as if something cracked inside her. "Stop," she whispered. "Just stop." He turned to her, desperation flooding his voice. "Mom, I needed a chance. He always had everything. You only lied," she said, her voice now steady. "Again and again. And we let you." Ronald finally stepped forward. He reached for the papers David had placed on the table. His eyes moved slowly across the pages. "I thought I raised a man," he said, not looking at Zane. "Turns out I funded a fraud." Those words landed like stone. Zane's composure shattered. He rose abruptly, his chair toppling behind him. "It's always been him," he screamed, pointing at Logan. "You never looked at me unless he failed. You only saw me when you needed someone to blame. All I ever wanted was to be enough for this family." Logan didn't speak. He didn't move. Ronald did. "Maybe," he said quietly, eyes finally meeting Zane's, "because he never made us ashamed." Zane froze. The silence stretched, punctuated only by Cheryl's soft weeping. The suit of lies he'd worn, tailored over years of manipulation, no longer fit. It sagged, exposed and stained. There was no one left in the room to zip it back up for him. No more masks, just a son standing in front of the ruins he built himself. All empires built on lies eventually fall. The line looped over and over in Zane's mind as he sat hunched on the edge of his couch, surrounded by unopened envelopes and a silence so heavy it felt like another person in the room. The lights in his apartment flickered once, as if unsure whether to stay. Outside, the winter wind howled faintly through the cracks of the window pane, a reminder that even the world had turned cold. But inside, it was worse. The cold here came from absence. No voices, no phone calls, no one knocking on the door. Just him, and the aftermath. He picked up his phone again, thumb trembling. The screen glowed with the same unanswered texts from earlier. Zane. "Mike, call me back, man. Please." Zane. "We can fix this. I just need a second chance." Scene. No reply. He scrolled through his contacts, all names that used to mean something. Clients, friends, business partners. He tapped one. Voicemail. He tapped another. Disconnected. The pile of mail beside him had grown over the past 2 weeks, each envelope another weight stacked on top of his chest. Some he'd opened and tossed aside. Bank statements, collections notices, warnings. Some he didn't have the stomach for. Until now. He tore one open. A letterhead he recognized. Meyer LLP, Sophie. He skimmed the words. Mr. Zane West, your accounts remain frozen pending further audit. Continued slander or defamation attempts may result in additional legal action. We recommend you cease all contact with involved parties until further notice. He crumpled the letter with shaking hands, teeth grinding. Another envelope, hand-addressed. Different handwriting. Logan's. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to throw it away unopened, to pretend this wasn't happening. But curiosity, shame, regret, whatever it was, it won. He unfolded the page. This is not revenge. This is clarity. I asked you for years to stop taking. You laughed, lied, manipulated. I gave anyway. Now I'm giving you something else. Freedom. From pretending. From the image you built on my back. Use it how you will. Logan. The paper shook in his hands. He stared at it so long his vision blurred. Freedom. That word rang out like an insult. He stood abruptly, knocking the stack of letters to the floor. One by one, he gathered them. Sophie's threats, Logan's letter, the eviction warning he'd hidden under the bills, and shoved them into the trash. His breath came in uneven gasps, every fiber of his body tensing like he could fight the truth if he clenched hard enough. But it was useless. The weight didn't move. His legs buckled. He dropped to the floor, knees hitting the cold hardwood. The room felt darker somehow, though the lights were still on. The shadows grew longer, thicker. A life built on illusion had no beams left to support it. He lay there, chest heaving, staring at the ceiling as if it could offer answers. There were none. Just the shrill ping of a phone. He turned his head slowly. One new message. RE:"Notice of eviction -7 days remaining period." Even the walls were leaving him now. Justice doesn't heal, but it clears the path. The words echoed in Logan's mind as he sat at the small table by the window, steam curling up from the untouched cup of coffee in front of him. Outside, Boston bustled as usual. Cars honked, boots splashed through thawing snow. But in here, everything was still. Warm. Familiar. He remembered this place. The clink of ceramic mugs, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of conversation. And just beyond the bar, a teenage employee wiped down the same tables Logan once had. Same ragged towel, same too big apron, same nervous glance toward the manager when he missed a spot. Logan watched him work, the corners of his mouth curling upward. Not in amusement, but something gentler. Recognition. David approached quietly, a coffee in hand. Still think about back then? He asked, sliding into the seat opposite Logan. Logan gave a small nod. Some days, mostly when I need to remind myself that climbing up doesn't mean forgetting where you started. David sipped, then asked what had been hanging unspoken between them. You still angry? Logan exhaled, slow and steady. Number, I'm free. There wasn't pride in his tone. No bitterness either. Just a quiet finality. A closing of doors without slamming them. His phone buzzed. An email. Logan opened it with the same ease one might open a window to let in fresh air. From New Roots Foundation. Subject, Annual Scholarship Drive, Seeking Sponsors. He read through the body of the message, eyes skimming over stories of struggling teens, single parents, and minimum wage dreamers. He hit reply. I'd like to sponsor 5 full scholarships for staff who've worked through school. Let's call it the West Start Fund. Logan. He hit send, and with it, a strange lightness settled into his chest. Across the shop, the young employee fumbled a coffee cup. It didn't shatter, but the noise made the entire shop glance up. Logan didn't flinch. David gave a small smirk and walked over to help, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. The past never vanished. But it didn't have to define you. The bell above the entrance chimed. Logan didn't turn until he heard a voice behind him, soft and unsure. Logan. He looked up. Cheryl. She looked smaller than he remembered. Not physically, but the air around her, the way she clutched her purse strap like it was the only thing holding her together. Her eyes were red, but not puffy. She had cried before arriving, not during. He stood slowly. She didn't come closer. I'm not here to ask for anything, she said, voice barely audible over the hiss of milk frothing. He said nothing. Waited. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For not seeing you sooner, for... Her voice cracked. For letting things go so far. He nodded once, gently. I don't blame you, Logan said. But I also don't carry it anymore. That weight, it's yours now. Cheryl wiped at her cheek. You don't have to forgive us. I'm not forgiving, he replied. I'm letting go. She stepped forward, pulling something from her coat. A small framed photo. Logan, age 10, standing in front of the family house holding a soccer trophy. He had forgotten that moment. I found this, she said. Thought you should have it. You were proud then. He took it, fingers brushing the old frame. I still am. Just for different reasons. Cheryl turned to go, but paused at the door. You became the man we never deserved, she whispered. Logan didn't reply. Instead, he looked back at the young employee, now laughing nervously with David. A quiet joy settled into his chest. Justice had come. But peace. Peace was something he'd earned for himself. ChatGPT Jan Noi. Bancho mot ngoi? No, I made a reservation for the owner. The host blinked twice before recognition dawned. A smile, warm, no longer polite but genuine, spread across her face. Of course, Mr. West. Right this way. Logan stepped into the glow of the lighthouse, the hum of holiday music underscoring the quiet elegance of Christmas Eve. The same chandeliers gleamed above him, the same scent of rosemary and roasted lamb curled through the air. But everything had changed. Or maybe it was just him. He wore a dark wool coat, tailored to fit. Not for show, but because he had finally decided he was worth wearing something that fit. His hands, ungloved, traced the velvet banister as he climbed the stairs. Guests at nearby tables glanced up. Is that the guy who got disowned? Someone whispered. David, appearing like a quiet wind behind Logan, answered before Logan could even hear the question. No, David said. That's the guy who owned everything. Logan smiled, barely, and followed him into the same private room that had once been a sanctuary, then a war room, and now, finally, a monument to peace. There was no dinner planned, no speech, no audience, just a seat, a bottle of red, and the slow, ambient hush of snow drifting against the windows. He sat, looked out. The table was set for one, but it wasn't lonely. It was intentional. He poured himself a glass, raised it not in toast, but in reflection. This place had once been where he washed plates, then where he was humiliated, then where he pulled the rug from beneath the people who had mistaken his silence for weakness. And now, it was simply his. No anger, no bitterness. He stood and walked to the mirror in the corner, the same one Zane had once used to adjust his expensive tie while mocking Logan's thrift store shirt. Logan looked at himself, not seeking approval, not checking for flaws. I don't need a table anymore, he said, eyes steady. I built the damn building. Behind him, no applause sounded. No vindication ceremony. Just silence. But it was his. He walked back to the table, placed an envelope neatly on the crisp white tablecloth. It bore no name, just a single line written in simple ink. To whoever still doubts me, this was never about proving anything, just peace. Logan put his coat back on, nodded once at David by the door, and descended the stairs slowly. Outside, the snow had thickened. The streets were quieter than usual, and Christmas lights blinked in the distance, soft reds and greens. Logan didn't walk quickly. He didn't have to anymore. The world had turned. He hadn't forced it. He just waited until it finally saw him. And now, there was nothing left to prove. Only peace to live in. The restaurant that once echoed with cruel jokes and whispered pity now stood silent in awe, as the man they once mocked walked away. Not as a victim, but as its rightful owner. Logan never raised his voice, never demanded applause. He simply laid out the truth, one quiet fact at a time, until the mask shattered and the lies fell like broken glass at his brother's feet. What began as a dinner of humiliation turned into a reckoning no one could escape. And yet, Logan never sought revenge for revenge's sake. He didn't destroy to feel powerful. He exposed to restore balance. In doing so, he reminded everyone of a brutal truth. Justice doesn't come knocking. It must be built, piece by piece, with patience sharper than any sword. Like a storm that clears the air but leaves scars behind, his path was painful, but necessary. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's the final act of strength when you've been underestimated too long. And when betrayal is met with unshakable dignity, the oppressor has nowhere left to hide but inside their own shame. The fall of Zayn wasn't just personal, it was a cautionary tale. Build your empire on lies, and one truth is enough to tear it down. To those who have ever been silenced at their own family's table, laughed at by those they loved, or pushed aside despite being the backbone, Logan's story stands as a quiet anthem. He didn't scream to be heard. He simply let the facts speak. And when they did, they roared louder than all the mockery ever could. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates forever once it's heard. No matter how deep the betrayal, no lie survives forever under the weight of truth. And no wall of arrogance can stand against someone who finally decides to stop carrying it. Perhaps this is the lesson. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they gave you their cruelty. Sometimes the strongest move isn't to fight back, but to rise above, calmly, undeniably, until the world has no choice but to see you. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Comment 1 if you felt deeply connected to Logan's journey. Comment 2 if you think the family deserved even more consequences. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories where justice, no matter how late, always arrives.